Well, it's about 10 years later after I put up what turned into my most popular video on YouTube explaining the synchros in a gearbox and what to look for and how you get that crunch. Now here's one here that I've rebuilt as part of a package going onto an engine here shortly. But this was really a chance to kind of show. The question always comes up, well, I rebuilt the engine and here's the gearbox. How do I know it's good? I mean, I can look in there and go, well, the gears look good. But let's show some general interest things and some things to look for. We show our high-tech devices that we use in support of our Cooper Roadman project here. There we go. Now we can show a few things. All right, I better not get in trouble with get flagged for using copyrighted material there. Thank you very much, YouTube and Metallica. First of all, it's just interesting to see how these work. Let's say if the car is rolling without the engine running, as long as your foot's not on the clutch, all that happens is this main shaft turns. Simply the differential turns, attached to the wheels, of course, and the main shaft inside of all these gears. Everything else stays stationary because the engine isn't turning, and it's linked to this gear right here. When you're looking down in here, you can't really see much of the synchro, but you can load these sliders. When you shift gears, this is what happens. These things move and slide over these small, they're called engagement dogs. That's what puts the thing in gear. You're in a constant mesh. In other words, if the engine's turning and you're in neutral, these gears are doing this. These gears are always turning. That's what you get when the engine's running and the car is not moving and you're not in any gear. All the gears are already engaged. When you shift, you slide these collars over and you select one of these to lock onto the shaft. Here's the shaft here. If I held everything still, you can see the shaft turns. Here's the output right over here, the differential. When you're towing a Mini with the engine not running, all you're turning is the shaft in here with the wheels. So that turns inside. Yes, there's oil down here and it's okay for reasonable distances. I've never been real keen on it for thousands of miles behind a motorhome, but that's what you get. That's what's turning. The main shaft inside of all the cluster, inside of all each gear has a roller bearing on that shaft. But these all turn at different speeds, and that's what you get. When the input comes in here, by the time you're in first gear and it's going out here, the engine's turning many times for one turn of the wheels. By the time you get into fourth, it's 1-to-1. One turn here is one turn at the shaft, not at the wheels. You've still got a differential that lowers that ratio so the engine can move the car. You can turn this thing pretty easily while keeping the shaft still, what I'm doing here. Now, if you put a load, as though you're pushing on first gear right now, you can see, I can feel, and you have to take my word for it, this is putting a load on the shaft. It's making it much harder to turn the shaft here when I'm pressing as though I'm trying to select first, and that's because that synchro in there is riding up on that cone and making that gear go the same speed as the shaft. This is splined onto the main shaft, remember? These selector forks, both for first, second, and third, fourth in this case. And when you put pressure on them, that synchro immediately, and I mean, how fast can you bang a gear? And this is a fairly primitive box, not known to be the fastest gear banging setup, but still, they work fantastic when they're set up right. And as soon as you put a load on this to go to push into first gear, that gear is instantly brought to the same speed as the shaft, and this engagement happens smoothly. Now, I've got the detent springs in the linkage here, but I can probably pull it into first with a little help here. There we go. It goes a little further than you need to in the car because you don't have the limitation of the linkage. But you see there we select first and second, if the camera didn't jiggle too much. The easy one to do is reverse. There's no synchro, and you can see that when you move it over and push it into reverse, you immediately reverse the rotation of the main shaft to the rest of the gears. That main shaft is now going backward relative to the input. You can see the output here is turning the wheels. You can't see the differential in the way I've got my camera mounted, but you got to take my word for it. That's reverse. Now, that brings up a nice point. If you've got one of these after you've rebuilt it, a lot of times these synchros, what's available, you match them up and they look great. Wow, that's got a lot. It's got a lot of wear potential. But they can actually be too great, and they don't sit far enough on the cone for this to turn freely. If you put one of these together and you find that it's sticking and one of the synchros is dragging with the gear and you can't hold the shaft still, if you can run these things on a test stand, put it in reverse and let it run. Because look what happens to all of the synchros on the gears when you're in reverse. Engine's still going to turn the shaft that way, but all of these cones, remember, splined to the main shaft, are turning the opposite way as the gears. And so they're turning the synchros with them because they're splined into those three big lugs inside these shift collars. So if you run the engine in reverse, you're very quickly going to break your synchros in nicely and shape them to the gears and take out that drag. Now that drag, people say, well, it's going to wear in, it's good to have extra. But that drag makes it hard to shift gears, any gears. If you got a seriously dragging third gear synchro, it's always going to be trying to preload the shaft and try to get it to go the speed of third gear. And that's going to make it one of those things where you just, you're pushing on the shifter hard. It won't go into gear, especially when it's colder and the oil is thick. And so if it's already together, you don't have an opportunity to run it on a table. I've gone so far as to take a car that's just not behaving well, gears won't select. When you're at a stop, people blame the clutch. But if you've got a dragging synchro, it's going to make it really hard to pick first gear. So it's pretty cool. What I've done is you can actually go to a big parking lot and drive around backward for half a mile. The Mania parking lot's right nearby, and on a weekend it's a big open place. I've taken the moke that I built, just had a sticky train, it just wouldn't quite break in as nicely. You put it in reverse and you back up a mile or so. I'm not saying fly around corners and do crazy things, but if you drive a big parking lot in a circle in reverse 5 times, you've got a mile. And so it's a nice way to quickly get all these synchros to take the shape of the gear. You'd be amazed after that backup trick how much better a freshly rebuilt transmission will shift. Let me take it back out of reverse here real quick. You see the gate in here, it's really hard to see. This shift linkage is so bulletproof, but it's all at the bottom underneath all of this stuff. So there's nothing to be seen. But if you're checking one of these out, geez, does it need a rebuild before I put it back on the engine? Have a look at these synchros in here. You can preload these collars even when you don't line up the gates. You can just load that and you can tell that the shaft has some resistance in any of the gears. And that means that synchro is doing its job, trying to make that gear turn at the same speed as the main shaft. And so there's a quick check, visual things. If it's one of these, a lot of times people that have gone through them, you can see really sloppy jobs on the lock tabs. You can see the British way of taking these great big nuts off is to get a chisel and put a big old chunk in the edge of it and pound it off. You may see some beaten up like that. If they're not broke, not gone, seldom is that going to fail. But it's indicative of possibly some less than meticulous work. But pretty simple gearboxes. You can verify that all the gears are there. All these points look good. These little spacers you can see here set that end float. And there shouldn't be much. With these helical cuts, there is going to be a sideways loading. So it's pretty critical that that's not going bang every time you're on and off throttle. I've got this one set probably around 3 or 5, somewhere there, maybe less. This one's a really nice fit, probably less than about 2 to 3 thousandths of end float. But this one ready to go on, this is going to shift beautifully. Standard A+ ratio, 344, perfect for one of these standard street 1275s. Another thing to check, look at the comments on my popular video there where I explain the crunching. People say, well, what if it jumps out of gear? What if it jumps out of third or whatever? If you have a chance to look inside, you see these little dogs, they're called, the little engagement dogs. They're the part of the gear that engages with the slide collar as you shift gears. If you've got a lot of power, or you got a lot of miles on something, some sloppy shifts, some misshifts, you start to wear these little dogs. These should have perfectly parallel machined sides to the corresponding spline on the inside of this gear. When you start to wear them, they'll start to sort of get a sideways ramp. If you're looking at a big version, it starts to put a sideways face on it here, such that when you put a load, torque load that way, there's a tendency for it to slip off that ramp, boom, into a neutral when you're applying power. It tends to happen when you change direction of load by applying throttle or getting off the throttle. You find that you have to hold the shifter to keep the thing in third gear as you decelerate, or you gotta, as you're going from second to third, if you don't keep it in second, it'll jump out before you've let go of the power, and you get this awkward bang into neutral. Look for wear on these little teeth if you have a chance to look inside. If everything looks nice and straight, all the bearings look good, there's obviously no damage to the bearings. If you have a chance, blow some air down into this oil pickup tube. Make sure your pickup screen down there is clean. Of course, this is brand new. This is the center oil pickup, the improved version for these gearboxes. And so this thing is ready to go on the engine. And when it goes in the car, we know it's going to work. No surprises.